Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2020 Dallas Smythe Memorial Lecture. My name is Enda Brophy, and I teach in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University. I'd like to open this lecture by acknowledging that SFU lies on unceded Coast Salish territory, including the traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Coquitlam peoples. This year's lecture takes place in exceptional circumstances. Normally, we would all be together in the Javid Mofagian World Arts Center at SFU Woodwards. Due to the spread of COVID-19, we've been forced, for the first time in the 27-year history of this lecture, to cancel the physical gathering and to move it online. The lecture will be supplemented by a virtual Q&A session on Zoom, which we're going to hold at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, March 18th. Instructions for joining the session have been circulated on social media by myself and the School of Communication, and will also be available on the event pages for the Dallas Smythe Memorial Lecture on the School of Communication and the SFU Vancity Office of Community Engagement websites. We hope this means we'll be joined by even more people than the 150-person capacity we had reached in the in-real-life version of this lecture. There are so many people to thank for the production of this lecture at the best of times. In the present context, that list has only gotten longer. I'd like to thank Alex Klinka and Emma Keeler-Dugas for helping out with the Zoom Q&A and publicizing this event via the School of Communications networks. Thank you to Rachel Wong, Am Johal, and Paige Smith from the SFU Vancity Office of Community Engagement for their constant support in the face of all of the challenges produced by this edition of the lecture. I'd also like to thank the School of Communication, the Labor Studies Program, the SFU Vancity Office of Community Engagement, and the Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology for supporting this event. And finally, special thanks go to Brenda Baldwin for event organization and Chris Jaselnik for his commitment to resolving the technical challenges in this lecture. I'll be introducing the 2020 Smythe lecturer, Dr. Jack Cho, shortly. But before that, I'd like to spend a minute or so discussing this annual event and the scholar whose memory we're remembering right now. Each year, the Smythe Memorial Lecture honors a critical scholar whose work has made a mark on or has important implications for the political economy of communication. Dallas Smythe was a professor of communication at SFU from 1976 till he passed away in 1992. He's now recognized globally as a leading scholar of communication processes, as well as a founding figure in the political economy of communication. Almost 3 decades from his passing, Smythe's work is more relevant to the contemporary media landscape than ever. Smythe's scholarship was deeply marked by his personal history. He was born in Canada and trained as an economist in the United States, before returning after being blacklisted for belonging to pacifist and social justice organizations during the Cold War. It's exactly those kinds of political convictions, I might add, which will be necessary to address the crisis we now face and reverse decades of social disintegration under neoliberalism. Tonight we are extremely lucky to have Dr. Jack Cho delivering the Smythe Memorial Lecture. Dr. Cho is professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he directs the Center for Chinese Media and Comparative Communication Research, or the C-Center, and co-directs the Center for Social Innovation Studies at the Hong Kong Institute of Asia-Pacific Studies. He's the author of touchstone texts in the field, including Working Class Network Society, Communication Technology, and the Information Have Less in Urban China, and Goodbye iSlave, a manifesto for digital abolition. Most recently, he's the co-author of Super Sticky WeChat and Chinese Society. Cho is an elected fellow of the International Communication Association and a recipient of the 2019 Edwin C. Baker Award for the Advancement of Scholarship on Media, Markets, and Democracy. Dr. Cho's research has focused on the relationship between the capitalist mode of production, digital media, social class, and labor resistance. His inquiries into the expansion of digital networks in China and the formation of a migrant workforce producing the digital technologies required for communicative capitalism have been groundbreaking. Dr. Cho collaborates with grassroots labor NGOs and is a co-founder of Platform Cooperative Consortium in Hong Kong. Lately, his attention has turned to the sustained resistance movement on the part of populations in Hong Kong against the Chinese state, as well as the role of communication scholarship in a consideration of post-capitalist possibilities. Given all of this, it's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Cho, whose talk tonight is entitled Leaderless but Organized, Hong Kong Struggle, Digital Media, and Everyday Resistance Against Authoritarian Capitalism. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and take care.
Thank you, Enda, for the generous introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. My voice, I'm sorry, is a little unnatural because I got a cold the other day. I'm still recovering, so please beg your pardon with that. And even more so, it's a huge shame that I cannot be with you today physically in Vancouver due to the viral outbreak. But I'm very glad we can continue exchanging ideas across the Pacific Ocean at this difficult time. Just make sure to wash your hands and stay healthy. We shall overcome. So deeply honored and grateful I am to speak to you at this memorial lecture, because to me, the work of Professor Dallas Smythe carries a special weight. I came to know about him through Professor Yue Zhizhao at Simon Fraser University. Once upon a time, she wrote a paper after mobile phones watch, paying tribute to another article after Bicycles Watch, written by Professor Dallas Smythe in 1973, following another trans-Pacific exchange of ideas. Back then, there was no internet, no coronavirus, and China was a very different country. Smythe went to China almost 5 decades ago, probably by way of Hong Kong. Inspired by Maoism, he came back and wrote this Bicycles article, which blew me away with its extraordinary vision on socialist technology, breaking away from capitalism. I recommended to my doctoral student at the time, Wang Hongzhe, who before I knew it, translated the Bicycles piece into Chinese, which you see here. Those who remember the Bicycles piece would know that Smythe wrote it as a letter to leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. Yet average readers in China would have to wait for more than 4 decades to read it in Chinese. 2 insights from this article have stood the test of time. One is Smythe's focus on the consciousness industry, i.e. Western capitalist media industries, facing challenges from socialism in the East, as exemplified by 大字报, or big character posters, the definitive Maoist medium of communication. This struggle between capitalism and socialism occurs in the ideological and economic activities of everyday life. This is the first important idea from Smythe. The other insight, not unrelated, is about emerging media technologies. In this article from the 70s, Smythe advised his Chinese comrades to develop a quote-unquote two-way TV system, designed not for advertising, but for workers, farmers, and soldiers. A proletariat YouTube, owned by and operated for the people, which entails a fundamental reorientation to put needs before tools. Yes, needs before tools, as Smythe put it, meaning technology is secondary. Only actual human needs are primary when organized collectively beyond individual wants and corporate greed. This rings a bell today when we hear complaints about technological advancement violating ethics and public interest. The question is, could it be otherwise in places such as Hong Kong? Inspired by Smythe's call for a Marxist media theory, I attempt to dissect the case of Hong Kong today. What happened? Under what circumstances? Hong Kong's struggle is often described as quote unquote leaderless but organized, meaning there is no central leadership while people self-organize in a mode that my colleague Francis Lee calls open source protest. Why is it so? How to comprehend it from a left perspective, paying particular attention to the role of digital media. What are the implications for everyday resistance against authoritarian capitalism worldwide? This is my modest argument. In the case of Hong Kong, too often voices from the left are marginalized. The result is a partial picture whose systematic omissions contribute to a right-wing view that is oversimplified and ahistorical. It does not do justice to the complexity and the historical significance of this struggle. It limits our capacity to appreciate Hong Kong as one of the most representative social struggles in the 21st century, as a seminal case for the imagination of alternate digital media, left activism, and economic justice beyond capitalism. My goal here is to put the neglected into the limelight in order to fill the gap between the mediatized Hong Kong processed for us by the consciousness industry and the real Hong Kong imbued with complexity and socialist potentials. In so doing, I share my firsthand observations and ongoing dialogue with members of the movement. I won't pretend to be neutral because at stake is a highly divisive topic, because I'm presenting a Marxist analysis while rectifying the usual neoliberal accounts of Hong Kong. Following Smythe's footsteps, I am critical of capitalism and in favor of socialism. There should be no confusion about this stance. Before diving into Hong Kong, we need to first consider what is authoritarian capitalism. The French historian Ferdinand Blondel argued long ago that capitalism necessarily depends on authoritarian government, as in 17th century European mercantilism. In the 19th century, Karl Marx wrote about patent control during the Industrial Revolution, extending labor discipline from the sphere of state to the factory shop floor. Authoritarianism is, in this sense, nothing new to historical capitalism, but under contemporary conditions of neoliberal plunder and Silicon Valley plutocracy, the concept of authoritarian capitalism acquires new relevance. Drawing from the Frankfurt School, Christian Fuchs maintains that authoritarian capitalism has become a definitive feature of our era, requiring serious treatment. He defines authoritarian capitalism as, quote, a capitalism that uses repressive state power in order to advance capitalist interest, which features a blurring of the boundaries between the state and big capital, state intervention into the economy in favor of big capital, law and order politics, armament and militarism, and a certain degree of repressive politics against immigrants, the political oppression, and other constructed enemies. He then examines Trump's demagoguery. Now, let's take this analysis to the other side of the Pacific, to my home city. Hong Kong has 7.5 million residents, about 3 times the population of Greater Vancouver, but its size is only a bit more than 1/3 of Vancouver. As such, it's one of the most densely populated urban areas on Earth. Hong Kong is a global financial center and a hub for international commerce. The conservative Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. has ranked Hong Kong as the world's freest economy for 24 consecutive years since 1995. Yet, despite the reputation of laissez-faire capitalism, the reality in Hong Kong is decreasing market competition, increasing oligopoly, falling rates of profits, and rising social discontent, coupled with unprecedented use of state violence against dissent, making the city a typical case of authoritarian capitalism in Asia. For 155 years, Hong Kong was ruled by the British. It was the last colony being detached from the British Empire in 1997. Since then, under the one country, two systems arrangement, Hong Kong has been a special administrative region of China. China is, of course, no longer the Maoist country Smythe set foot on. Borrowing from Wang Hui, the prominent leftist thinker in Beijing, David Harvey calls it neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics. If we build on this phrase, then Hong Kong is authoritarian capitalism with Chinese and British characteristics, in that the British left a mixed bag of legacies. On the one hand, the city-state is supposed to keep its British institutions, preserving certain quote-unquote benevolent legacies, such as press freedom and rule of law. On the other hand, today's Hong Kong government inherits an entire system of structural injustice from the British. As labor researcher Leung Po Long points out, many of the same colonial laws that were passed in response to workers' struggles during the colonial era are direct precursors, if not the same ones, that are activated or called upon by the Hong Kong government today against its dissenters. After all, colonialism and neoliberalism are different variants of authoritarianism. We should anticipate their continuity. According to The Guardian, Hong Kong is the world's #1 protest city, where on each day, on average, you would see 35 demonstrations. Together, this amounts to 13,000 protests in year 2016, making Hong Kong the global capital of protests. Since the 19th century, the city-state has served as a hotbed of political activism against the Qing dynasty, against French colonization of Vietnam, against Japanese jingoism, and above all, against the British. A watershed moment came in 1989, when 1.5 million Hong Kongers gathered to protest the Tiananmen crackdown. Jean-Philippe Bijard regards this as the birth of Hong Kong's political identity. When dock workers went on strike in 2013, for instance, they fought for labor rights in Hong Kong with a unique blending of local issues with internationalism, away from concerns about China's political future. The same tendency could be seen in both the umbrella movement of 2014 and the anti-extradition movement since last year. Protests in Hong Kong were famous for their peacefulness. When growing up in mainland China, I witnessed violent physical attacks and damage to property during demonstrations. When living in California, at every protest, I would hear the F word, which admittedly I also use too often in American streets. But when I first took part in protests in Hong Kong, I couldn't be more shocked to witness the absolutely peaceful demonstrators who abhor foul language and pick up the trash when they go home. Some may wonder why Hong Kong protesters were so obsessed with being peaceful and rational. It has to do with the demographics, being mostly the middle and professional classes. More crucial is the limited development of party politics. Hong Kong had no local election until 1982, meaning London only started to democratize Hong Kong in the last 15 years of its 1.5 century colonial rule, leaving insufficient time for political parties to mature. Hence, local politics tend to be expressed through media outlets instead of parliament, so much so that Joseph Mancham calls it the surrogate democracy function of the media. Hong Kongers, when mobilized, tend to trust their direct participation in protest because it creates favorable media images, as you see on this slide. What you see here is not just peaceful demonstrators in huge numbers. These are public spectacles made by and shared by millions collectively, not by a single party or a small elite. Politics in Hong Kong unfolds along lines of social cleavages. Foremost among them are the divisions of social class. First, between the capitalists vis-a-vis the working classes. Hong Kong is heaven for the rich, but hell for the poor. 1/5 of the city's population live below the poverty line, resulting in the highest Gini coefficients among post-industrial economies anywhere on Earth, which is 0.54, higher than most African countries. Second is the divide between career bureaucrats now captured by Beijing and Hong Kongers longing for liberty and equality. In 1965, Mao famously argued officials could constitute a class in and for itself. Now, this has become bitter reality in Hong Kong. Not only those sitting in air-conditioned government offices, but also armed police and triad members. Opposite to them are Hong Kongers fighting for freedom and human rights. While the first basic divide is due to unequal modes of production, the second divide stems from loyalty-based uneven distribution of power. In addition, there are other divides, for instance, between old and young, mainlanders and Hong Kong locals, and inter-capitalist competition within the elite. These are secondary divides though. Compared with the first two cleavages, they are more fluid. Yet, popular media tend to focus excessively on these secondary divides, portraying, for instance, that all youngsters are dissidents, and those of older age are pro-government. This ignores the visible role of gray-haired citizens on the front line. It also forgets that members of the police are mostly young Hong Kongers too. This is Hong Kong's political landscape on top of the socio-economic divides. The most fundamental contestation is between the pro-Beijing establishment camp and the opposition camp, which until 10 years ago included centrist parties, aka the moderate Democrats. They used to lead the opposition since 1989, but in recent years, they face pressure from both the left and the right. Unlike moderate Democrats, the leftist parties call for overhaul of capitalism to redistribute wealth, enhance labor rights and social justice. They read Marx, talk about socialism, instigate strikes. They include feminists, Trotskyists, environmentalists, etc. For their apparently foolish behaviors in ultra-capitalist Hong Kong, they are nicknamed leftards. The right wing in Hong Kong are called localists, who used to be a small minority, but they were on rapid rise. Localists are, in general, more militant. They value identity politics and despise class analysis. They advocate Hong Kong's independence from China. Despite the ideological difference, the left and the right share three things in common. A, they oppose the pro-Beijing camp. B, they dislike the moderate Democrats. And C, both groups want to be more radical. The left-right tension was palpable during the umbrella movement 6 years ago, when protesters camped in three of the city's main traffic arteries, demanding universal suffrage. Initially, it was supposed to be led by moderate Democrats, but radical student groups like HKFS and Scholarism jumped at the opportunity and became de facto leaders. When organizing class boycotts, they sometimes would end their rallies with the singing of the Communist Internationale, signaling their left tendencies. Here, the photo above is the left-wing student leaders speaking from the central platform of the umbrella movement. They controlled the microphone. They had the power to decide who could speak tonight, who could not. This upset the localists who demanded the dismantling of this central platform, rendering the movement, quote unquote, leaderless. The two photos at the bottom show the disagreement at the time. On the left were protesters hoping to keep the movement around a central leadership. On the right, it reads, alert, prevent leftards from hijacking the rally. As Edward Leung, a localist leader, said in 2016, referring to leftist parties, quote, we are always against leadership. We support spontaneous action by ordinary people in carrying out the struggle they want for themselves. Leung is also the person who coined the phrase Free Hong Kong Revolution Now in Chinese, which has become the most prominent slogan for Hong Kong's struggle. We will return to discuss this slogan. For now, let's just note the leaderless mode of organization, when first appeared, was a right-wing strategy to oppose the left. When the government proposed to modify Hong Kong's extradition bill early last year, the dynamism within the opposition camp has long been set in motion. A lot has happened. For a better structured understanding, Sophie Chen and I divide the struggle into three phases. First is the issue bursting period, when the movement was peaceful and the contestation intra-institutional, led by career activists and middle-class professionals, gradually joined by youth and other groups. Second is the focal escalation period, when the struggle turned violent, when a broad coalition emerged between working class and middle class activists, when Hong Kong became global news headline. Third is the phase of everyday resistance that lasted from mid-November till now. This latest period is marked by a combination of intra and extra-institutional struggles, a new tidal wave of unionization, and the formation of alternative moral economies. Digital tools have been essential to each of these three phases, although at each stage, their forms and functions vary, responding to the evolving needs of the struggle. On February 15th last year, the Hong Kong government proposed, with hubris, a new extradition bill, expecting to face little resistance. But since a large demonstration organized by CHRF, Civil Human Rights Front, took place in April, the issue became the talk of town. When 1 million protesters turned out on June 9th at another demonstration organized by CHRF, it was clear that the controversy has exploded. Until this point, participants remained peaceful and orderly, in line with the city's non-violent protest tradition, as exemplified here on the left by a rally of lawyers. In the middle is an online petition by teachers against the bill. Lawyers and teachers are two pillars of Hong Kong's civil society. Meanwhile, there were some clash of bodies, as shown on the right, in this so-called battle among lawmakers. But the clash was confined within the legislature. During this initial period, lawyers, politicians, and concerned citizens expressed themselves through petitions and rallies, as well as radio phone-in, opinion editorials, online forums, and social media. Both the pro and anti-establishment camps depended on the surrogate democracy function of the media, while the consciousness industry reproducing capitalist subjectivity started to break down. The controversy had an unexpected consequence within the opposition camp. It ended up connecting the left and the right, producing a movement coalition that was unprecedentedly broad in this political spectrum. This dynamism was evident in online debates among the left with regards to this slogan, which was, if you remember, first coined by a right-winger. But the left gradually accepted it. How could this happen? In Chinese, the first half of this phrase means literally re-enlighten Hong Kong, seen by localists as a call to restore the essence of British rule, such as laissez-faire capitalism. The second half means literally revolution of our times, which they often interpret as violent uprising. But for people on the left, the same slogan has different meaning, which was debated at online forums, such as the RTHK. This is a left-leaning news commentary website. Here, a commentator named Tony wrote against the idea to return to the British era. He argues, the Hong Kong we want is one in which there is universal suffrage and genuine democracy, where structural problems of livelihoods are ameliorated. Looking back at the last 100 years, this Hong Kong has never existed. What we actually want is an entirely new Hong Kong. What we must do is to build a Hong Kong that belongs to the people. This is not restoration, but a whole new era. The all is in Chinese. For those who'd like to read Hong Kong's left-wing narratives in English, I would recommend laosan.hk, whose articles are socialist and anti-imperialist. There, they also debate this slogan and call for genuine social revolution. Left-right debate took place during phase one, which paved the way for broad coalition building and the lifting of a right-wing slogan from its initial connotations, while broadening its meaning to suit the pursuit among the leftists. The second period went from mid-June to mid-November, which is the focal escalation period. Focal refers to Che Guevara's Foucaultismo theory that a regime's repressive reactions against a small group of paramilitary insurgents would help propagate the revolutionary cause in Cuba, for example. But now we see it in Hong Kong. This phase began on June 12th, when the Hong Kong police used excessive force to crack down on a few militant frontliners, as well as a large group of peaceful demonstrators. First, the police used tear gas and rubber bullets. Then, militant protesters retaliated with bricks and Molotov cocktails. The police then used live ammunition, water cannon, mass arrest, and they laid siege on university campuses, including the one I'm sitting on. Protesters further escalated violence, targeting not only the cops, but also public infrastructure. creating large-scale property damage. The focal period was marked by extra-institutional struggle and extra-legal show of force, edging on civil war. When leftist parties such as Socialist Action called for strikes during phase 1, most people laughed at them, thinking they were attempting the impossible. But in phase 2, Wildcat general strike sprung up throughout the city. While phase 1 was mostly led by career activists such as CHRF and middle-class professionals, in phase 2, the movement base has expanded to include members of the working class in an escalating urban guerrilla warfare that had participants from all walks of life. They coordinated their action through, most importantly, the online discussion forum LIHKG, Lindang, whose logo is the smiley you see on top. But it's not just Lindang. The visualization here shows the political spectrum of online media outlets. Blue ones being pro-Beijing, and yellow ones being supportive of the social movement. Among yellow media, there's a mixture of left and right-wing outlets, as well as more centrist media such as the Stand News, which stood out as the fastest growing media organization during this movement. The second major winner is inmediahk.net, a left-leaning website. The focal period also marked a turn when state suppression, militant defense, and aggression spread deep into the workplace and residential communities. This image from the New York Times shows the number of protests from June to November, when protests diffused from a few central locations in the CBD to local communities throughout Hong Kong, especially after August. 3 spikes. You see them as the circles here. These are spikes in the number of protests. They also happen to be the days when general strikes initiated by left-wing party happened, when localists also joined force. This slide shows the swing of public opinion away from the police. It was based on telephone survey conducted by my school when the percentage of Hong Kong citizens holding zero trust to Hong Kong police leaped from 6.5% in May to more than half of all Hong Kong citizens in October. The escalation of violence slightly backfired in November, but overall effect of the focal strategy against the ruling regime could not have been more clear. Finally is phase 3, the period of everyday resistance. On November 24th, Hong Kong had a local election when the opposition camp won by a huge landslide. Among the winners is Community Watch, a leftist group. This is how its spokesperson, Derek Chu, describes themselves, quote, "Our shared political platform centered on labor issues, the rights and voices of Hong Kong's many street hawkers, children's rights, and other policies that center on grassroots issues and the working classes. We are not localist, mainly because we are against all kinds of exclusionary policies towards marginalized peoples. We believe that working people, female blue-collar workers, and so on, have explosive political potential. People are starting to recognize that these are things more important. There are things more important than money and work. To me, this is a great challenge to the capitalist ideology in the city. Losing moral high ground, the Hong Kong government continued to use police violence in the streets and intimidation in the workplace against activism. Resistance thus become an integral part of routine everyday life. Most notable is the emergence of 49 new trade unions under circumstances of authoritarian capitalism in order to ensure co-workers would not be fired simply due to their political stance. Never before had so many unions emerged in such a short period of time in so many sectors of Hong Kong society. One of the new unions is HAEA, the Health Authorities Employee Alliance, whose members are nurses and doctors who went on strike last month during the coronavirus outbreak in order to pressurize the Hong Kong government to close its borders with mainland China and provide adequate supplies for medics. Thousands of hospital workers joined the strike with broad support from the opposition camp, left, right, and center. Another area is about developing an alternative economy. This is a smartphone app telling users which shops are owned by pro-establishment bosses, where you should avoid, and which are yellow economy shops that you should patronize. Essentially, it's a digitized consumer activism guide. Now you can carry in your pockets. HCons is an e-commerce website that devotes its earnings to the hiring of youngsters who were arrested with criminal records because of this movement. More than 7,000 have been detained by the police, and they face discrimination in the job market. This essentially is an Amazon, but owned and operated by protesters. Alternative digital platforms are essential to everyday resistance, facilitating the founding of unions, cooperatives, and pro-movement smartphone apps. Most important is Telegram, the sign on the left, due to its strong encryption functions. But there are numerous other tools being used for deliberation, decision-making, and project management during everyday resistance. These tools were selected and/or developed to meet the needs of the struggle. In so doing, they become a revolutionary base that consolidates intra and extra-institutional spaces while redefining temporality, producing a new political economy of resistance that operates at the existential level. Everyday resistance is not only about politics and economy, but also about culture. RTHK, Hong Kong's public broadcaster, is known for its satire programs and black humor. Although by far the most important entertainment medium is YouTube, where you can find several dozen versions of the movement's anthem, Glory to Hong Kong. My own favorite is Sonny Lam, on the left here, who writes pro-movement songs based on the melody of Canton pop classics. For example, this is his song calling for Hong Kongers to join a general strike. Under the shitty government of Hong Kong, although you make tons of money and another ton, like a dust with a simple warning, all will be gone. Finally, let me emphasize that these three phases, from issue bursting to focal escalation to everyday resistance, are cumulative. Non-violent protesters continue to march and sign online petitions to this day, while militant rebels occupy news headlines since phase 2. Everyday resistance through union drives, digital economy, and popular entertainment are now taking place while physical clashes continue. Back to the question, why leaderless but organized? On the surface, this has to do with the innovative use of digital media, which when properly selected and deployed, enables reliable self-organization. But speaking at a structural level, it is due to the underdevelopment of party politics in Hong Kong since the colonial era. It results from the umbrella movement 6 years ago, when intra-movement struggles between the left and the right was bitter and destructive. It also has to do with the repressive state that imprisons some leaders of the opposition while forcing others into exile on both sides of the ideological spectrum. Police brutality in the streets and unlawful dismissal of employees in the workplace due to their political stance made anonymity a primary need for many citizens. Hence, leaderless become not only possible, but also desirable. To conclude, I hope this is what we can learn from Hong Kong. Today, we have discussed more than a dozen digital tools, but note here, what is absent? No Facebook or Twitter, no Google or even Instagram. Except YouTube, Hong Kong's struggle does not rely on Silicon Valley tech giants. Instead, it has a bottom-up mechanism of what Smythe wrote about in the bicycle article. Okay, he called this bottom-up mechanism, he called it cultural screening of technology, meaning selective adoption of existing tools according to the needs of the movement, and in some cases, brand new startups creating digital tools from within the struggle. Hong Kong struggle is, of course, not an isolated event, but part of a global uprising. From Chile to Lebanon to Catalonia, the capitalist world system is creating unprecedented turmoil and facing systemic challenge. The COVID-19 outbreak is yet another special moment, calling for imaginations of an alternate society beyond capitalism and an alternate digital economy beyond Silicon Valley. In the context of authoritarian capitalism with Chinese and British characteristics, we see in Hong Kong's struggle how digital media can be detached from the consciousness industry, how the tools can be owned and operated by activists and citizens to support the struggle politically, economically, and culturally in everyday work and life. The case of Hong Kong sheds light on new possibilities for left-right coalition beyond the 20th century frameworks due to strategic needs of the movement. The way forward will necessarily require global solidarity against authoritarian capitalism on both sides of the Pacific, around the world as well. As Smythe would probably have agreed in writing his legendary bicycles article. If you can help, let's get Bernie Sanders elected. That would probably be important on this international front as well. Thank you very much.